Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Quality of Life, which is episode 9 of season 6 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos when I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 6th season episode, The Quality of Life. So The Quality of Life is the episode where the Enterprise goes to evaluate a new mining technology called a particle fountain, where they meet with the creator and director of this project, Dr. Fallon, and she is sort of very passionate, but she also introduces a new technology, a tool that she upgraded to help her with repairs and getting the particle fountain ready. Now, a problem comes in because Data makes the discovery that these tools may in fact be sentient, and so he orders that she stop using them for manual labor. This causes a big controversy, and so they test the devices called exocomps to see if they are in fact sentient, and they fail the test, so they resume work, and Picard and LaForge go over to the station to evaluate the project, but a huge disaster happens in which everyone's evacuated except for LaForge and Picard, who are trapped there and whose lives are in danger. So Dr. Fallon comes up with a plan to use the exocomps to explode them in order to disrupt the ion field or whatever the hell it is in order to rescue Picard and LaForge. The problem is Data had made the discovery that the exocomps in fact did not fail the test. They passed the test with flying colors, so he is more sure than ever that they are sentient. So he locks out the controls of the Enterprise, preventing Riker from beaming the exocomps over there as torpedoes, and Riker, of course, is furious, but Data still refuses to release it, saying it is not right to execute a couple individuals in order to save a couple other individuals. So Riker makes a deal with Data that he will give the exocomps a choice. Instead of disabling their command functions, he will leave it intact so the exocomps can choose to accept or reject their orders. So they go through with this, and the exocomps change the orders as they're not willing to go with Riker's plan. However, they come up with another plan to go over and save Picard and LaForge, so they execute that plan, and Picard and LaForge are able to return to the Enterprise, where one out of the 3 exocomps has to sacrifice its life in order to save the other 2 exocomps. And so Dr. Fallon now has a change of mind, and now agrees with Data that they're not simple tools and will treat them as such. Meanwhile, Data apologizes to Picard for putting his life in danger for a couple of tiny machines, but Picard tells Data it was the most human thing he ever did. So, I think this is a very underrated episode. Now, I think I put this as an honorable mention in one of my top 10s, and to be fair, I wouldn't put it that high, and I think I was just giving it a boost because I think it's an underrated episode and I want to highlight it. In fact, I don't remember if I included this in my top 10 underrated episodes of Star Trek. I may have. But anyway, I think I did actually. But anyway, I think it's a highly underrated episode. It's funny because when I first saw this episode, when it first came out, I didn't think much of it either. It wasn't until years later when I was watching it when I was a little bit older that I started to realize that, hey, I think I was around 19. I started to realize that, hey, this is actually a really powerful episode. So I believe, in my opinion, this is the first great episode of Season 6. Now, Season 6, I have said before, been on the record that I think is a great season, one of the best seasons, probably the second best season, or at least my second favorite season of TNG. And so far, season 6 has been abysmal. That's not a surprise, though. I knew that season 6 had a really rough start, but it's been hard pushing through it. Other than True Q, which was a good episode, and Relics, which was a decent episode, but also highly overrated. Other than those two, it's been mostly bad to mediocre episodes, and it's been hard to push through them. And so this is where I think season 6 changes. I think from here on out you get a lot more. This is where things start getting awesome. Now, that's not to say there are not any more bad episodes or mediocre episodes in season 6. There are a few sprinkled in towards the end of the season, but they're not like one after another like it was at the start of the season. They kind of sprinkled in between the really awesome episodes, so they're easier to stomach. But we'll see how I feel about season 6 once I get to the end of it. But yeah, it was just such a relief getting such a really good episode. Now, why do I like this episode so much? Well, because I think it's a really good character story, first of all. And I've been on record before that these are my favorite types of episodes, the ones that have good character stories. And like the kind of interactions you get. Like, I think this Dr. Felion, or whatever her name is, she's a really well-developed character. I think the actress who played her did a really great job. And so it was interesting focusing on her, but we also get a lot of great character. Of course, this is the Data episode, first and foremost, and we got a lot of great moments with Data. Particularly, we get some interactions with him and Dr. Crusher, which I think were great, because those are two characters we've seen interact before, but not that much, and so it was interesting to focus on them. I think LaForge handled himself well in front of, another woman, instead of making an ass out of himself, which I love. So they're actually portraying LaForge correctly, unlike they have done in the past, portrayed him incorrectly. And then you get a few great character moments with Picard as well. I think it's just overall it's a very strong character story. Definitely the strongest season 6 has done so far, and one of the strongest in TNG. But on top of that, it's got a great theme. So I actually think of this episode as the follow-up to Measure of a Man, or the successor to Measure of the Man. Now, I had said in the past that I think The Offspring is better than The Measure of Man, but I wouldn't call it the follow-up to The Measure of Man, because it was kind of different, and I just think it did what The Measure of Man did better, which is, for this episode, to be fair, I would say The Measure of Man is probably better than this episode, but I think this is it follows up of what The Measure of Man did, because The Measure of Man was about people doubting Data's sentient and Picard having to prove it. And so this is building off of that, where Data finds another mechanical being who he thinks is sentient, but others doubt it, so he has to prove it. And they even mention that. Like, they bring it up in this episode where Data explains why he risked Picard's life to protect these little mechanical thingies. And he says it's because when my life was in danger, you were there to protect me and speak up for me and protect my sentience. And the Exocomps didn't have anyone else, so I felt I needed to do that for them. And that's great. I love that follow-up. And I love the whole theme about what is, life and when does it start. And it is a different situation, and has Dr. Farrellion pointed out in this episode that that Dr. Soon intentionally set out to create a sentient android, where she did not set out to create sentient life form. She just wanted a tool to help her with their particle fountain. She just wanted a very smart tool to do it. But that doesn't mean that they're not sentient, just because they didn't set out to actually create something sentient. Which, funny enough, we actually get into that same sort of theme with Ship in a Bottle, which is just like past Chain of Commands Part 1 and 2, so almost just 3 episodes away, about sentient artificial life forms, but it handles it differently. So it's not like the same thing at all, but it just has a similar theme. But anyway, so I found that absolutely fascinating. As I said, I thought this was a beautiful character story for Data, a big growth for Data, and I think the way they handled Data, I talked about this before throughout TNG, that there's some writers that just do not know how to write for Data and write for him incorrectly, or don't write him consistently with how he should be portrayed. And then there's episodes like this that the writers really do know how to handle Data, and they write him absolutely correctly. And so so I thought it was a fascinating episode. It was, more character based. Like, the threat didn't really come in until like the last 10 minutes of the episode, and even then it only lasted for like 5 minutes. So I can see why maybe I didn't like this episode when I was 13, when I first saw it, because it is more of a slow dialogue character story. But as I grown older, I learned to appreciate those kinds of things a lot more. Now, so this episode was written by Nareen Shankar, who got his start as a writer on TNG, but he went on to be the showrunner for CSI and, more importantly, The Expanse, the best science fiction show of all time. Sorry, it is. And it's interesting getting his sort of insights in this episode, and I think he's a really good writer. I think that goes without saying. He's wrote some of my favorite episodes of Star Trek. But, so it's funny though, because the Exocomps itself are kind of cute, and that's kind of known for being, I believe Nareen Shankar described it as R2-D2 like cuteness. I think they're cuter than R2-D2. I remember showing this to my now ex-wife when I first met her, and she thought they were the cutest things ever. We always used to go like beep beep, the way they would like fly and have their little flaps and go beep beep. And Nareen Shankar actually didn't like that. He didn't like the fact that they made them cute. He thought that because he feels like it muddies the moral dilemma, because it makes it more like, oh no, we have to save their lives because they're so cute, rather than and being less certain that they're just a machine or something. Like, he was envisioning something like something that looked like a tricorder, or just a standard mechanical device. But I like the fact that they're cute. I think that's fine. And I would be remiss if I did not mention Lower Decks. So the Exocomps never appeared again in canon until Lower Decks, which is canon, which takes place several years later. And so it's interesting. I don't think I was quite clear on exactly how the Exocomps developed, because here there's just 3 of them that Dr. Farallon created, but towards the end of the last episode we saw the Exocomps appear in Lower Decks. They seem to have, I don't know if it was, I don't have Paramount Plus at the moment, so I can't go back and watch this episode, but I don't know if it was the same particle fountain, but they seem to be living on this station, and I don't remember any humanoids being there. So it seems like they sort of created their own society. And of course there's the character Peanut Hamper, who was the main character who first appeared on Lower Decks, who's an exocomp, but she talks. And she's really flighty, and a lot of people don't like her character because she's very annoying. I liked her fine in her first appearance. Her second appearance, it's not her that I dislike, it's the script of that episode, because it was about a redemptive arc, and spoilers for that episode, it ended with her being like, nah, I'm just kidding, I'm not redeeming anything, I am despicable. Which I think, what's a waste of time? Why are you wasting my time with that bullshit if there's no character change. But anyway, but then she appeared in a third episode where she did have a character change, and she returned home to her father, whose name is Kevin apparently, and and this is the episode I found most interesting in regards to the Exocomps, because it did portray the older generation of Exocomps as being like they were in this episode, of just being like beep, boop, bop, beep. Whereas she was like talking like a teenage girl. And so my headcanon there is that she was kind of second generation because she referred to Kevin as her father. So apparently the Exocomps found a way to reproduce themselves, because in this episode Dr. Frelion had to create them and do maintenance on them, and she was like kind of their master. But at the end of this episode, she starts to realize they're sentient and says that she'll treat them differently. So whatever happened, it seems like it led to them sort of creating their own society where they started to reproduce themselves, and apparently the next generation, pun not intended, the next generation of Exocomps could actually talk and not just beep, so they're actually more human-like. Now, I don't like Peanut Hamper as a character, I will say, especially because of that second episode. But I do think it is canon, and I do think it's interesting, actually, what Lower Decks decided to do with the Exocomps and have them be their own society where they're apparently evolving. I think that's a very interesting concept to explore. And Mike McMahon, the producer of Lower Decks, even talked about how he always loved this episode, Quality of Life, and loved the Exocomps, and thought that they were a fascinating thing that he wanted to explore more of. And I appreciate that. It's part of the reason why I love Lower Decks so much, is because they'll take these lesser known and like one-off races and reintroduce them and expand upon them. And yes, it is a comedy, and sometimes it can be silly what they're doing, but sometimes it is serious, and what they're doing is officially canon. So, yeah, but anyway, I'm not here to talk about Lower Decks, but I did need to explain how the Exocomps actually got further developed, which I think puts this episode in an interesting context, because it means that Data's efforts bore fruit and that eventually they did create their own society. Now, I've heard some people comparing it to the episode Evolution with the nanites, how the nanites start out as these mechanical things, but then they become sentient and they form their own society. But yeah, I thought that episode was okay. I didn't dislike it, but I would say that this episode is much better, because that one didn't really deal with like kind of the moral dilemma or the question, are they sentient? They like instantly knew, except for that one dude who was trying to kill them all. But when he tried to kill them, he shortly found out, yeah, they are very much sentient and they're pissed. And I don't know. And plus the fact that Wesley created them but has a school project, that irritates the hell out of me. So I just don't like that episode as much. But yeah, I think the concept is handled much better here. And as I say, I think it's like the natural continuation of Measure of a Man, which I really, really appreciate. So, speaking of Lower Decks, I gotta talk about the Tucker tubes, which appear in this episode. So, it's this prop that is just a tube with the blinky lights that doesn't really do anything, and it's been in many, many sci-fi movies and shows. And it's been in Star Trek multiple times, and eventually Lower Decks finally gives it a name and calls it the Tucker tubes, assumably named after Charles Tucker III. And they appear here, and as soon as I saw them, I'm like, hey, it's the Tucker tubes. Which I think it's funny that the Lower Decks finally gave it a name. But anyway, I just wanted to point those out. So, there's a side plot in this episode about Geordi growing a beard. He had it for just these 2 episodes. Fistful of Data's, and then this one. I remember recognizing that. And apparently, he also had one in the Outcast, and the backstory for that apparently was for the Outcast. He just showed up on set with a beard and like, yeah, I got a beard. What the fuck are you gonna do about it? And the producers like told him specifically he wasn't allowed to grow a beard, but he did it anyway. But it was only for that one episode. But for these 2 episodes, apparently he did get permission to grow a beard because he was getting married and he wanted to have a beard at his wedding. But apparently they didn't give him permission to keep it, which I think they should have. But yeah, but we get this scene where they make a big deal so they could actually work it into the script because they knew ahead of time he was going to have one. He didn't just show up like in the Outcast. So they had this whole scene where they're playing poker and Crusher was kind of being like making fun of men with beards and they were getting defensive, and so they come up with a bet that if one of them wins, that she'll have to dye her hair brunette. They didn't specify a time frame, so she could be really cheeky and just dye it for like 5 minutes and be like, okay, I'm a brunette now, and then change it back. I mean, in fact, what she said when they said, have you ever, oh, I would like to see you as a brunette, she's like, oh yeah, I tried that once when I was younger. I couldn't change it back fast enough. So I think they should have specified a time frame. Otherwise, you could change it back fast. Because, mind you, this is the future. In fact, we even saw this in Data's Day. In the background of the barbershop, there was this woman who was getting her hair color changed like instantly. And so you assume this is the future, and so that she would be able to do that. Yeah, it feels like they didn't have their bases covered. They should have specified a time frame. Whereas the beard, maybe they have futuristic stuff that has beards grow back really fast, but otherwise it would take a while for it to grow back. Yeah, and I think that's kind of an unfair bet for Beverly, because it's 3 against 1. So for her, it's a 1 out of 4 chance of winning, and for them, it's a 3 out of 4 chance winning. So that doesn't seem that fair. Although, to be fair, if she does win, then 3 people have to shave their beards, whereas one of them wins, only 1 person has to dye their hair. So I don't know. It just seemed like an unfair bet. And then they kind of copped out of the whole scene by having Picard call them to the bridge, and they're all like, and Crusher was really upset, so really highly implied she had a really good hand. And she's like, no, wait. And they're like, oh, you heard the captain. They seem to be very happy to leave. So I don't know. This scene's okay. It doesn't really belong. It doesn't add to the episode, but it's nice character moments. This is a character episode, so I'm fine with it. It doesn't really hurt the episode at all. But I don't think it's all that great either. But it is responsible for one of the most common memes you see online. I always try to point out these Star Trek memes when we come up with them. And here is a popular one I see over and over again, because of ones where they have LaForge going like that. And that's, from the poker game when it looked like Crusher was going to beat LaForge, and Riker was like, oh, Geordi. And he's like, hold. So the meme has him doing that, and they'll have something listed there like doing this. No. And then underneath, they'll have the picture of him going, and then the thing saying, not doing this, but doing that. I can't think of any specific examples, but if you've seen the meme, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, oh no, I'm trying to think of it. There was a specific Star Trek one. It's something like watching one episode of Star Trek a night to have fun, having Geordi go like that, and then underneath it will say watching an entire season of episodes of Star Trek a night, and him going. So, yeah, and he went like that when I don't know. Riker mentioned something about a beard was dignified. He'd be like. Anyway, so that's from this episode. Yeah, but other than that, I will say that I did find the ending of this episode very powerful. Again, the whole question of what, and I love the fact that Data was willing to risk Picard and Geordi. Geordi's his best friend, and Picard's probably his second best friend. And so I think the writers knew this, and that's why they specifically chose those two characters, so that Data would have to risk their lives in order to do it. And so I thought it was a very, very powerful moment when he just outright disobeyed orders and locked Riker out of the computer. And Riker, I love Riker's reaction, because at first he was obviously really pissed and yelling at him, but he was willing to hear Data out. He wasn't like, screw you, Data, and whatever, yelling. He was actually was trying to hear Data out and hear where he was coming from, and he was trying to make arguments back. And Data's response, I think, was really interesting, because he was like, well, send me over. I know I'll probably die, but I'm going to do it willingly, where the Exocomps don't have a choice. And so then that leads Riker to come up with a good compromise, to be like, okay, well, what if we give them a choice? And they make that compromise, and Data's like, okay, I'm willing to go along with this, and Riker goes along with it. I love that. So they both wanted the same thing. They both wanted to save Picard and LaForge. It's just Riker didn't really, because it hadn't been proven beyond a doubt that the Exocomps were sentient, so he wasn't willing to sort of risk trying to come up with another plan when they had one right in front of them. But Data, of course, had to stick up for these life forms that Riker was essentially trying to kill, and saying, no, I can give you another alternative. I'll go because I choose to. But then Riker, I think Riker's compromise was a really good compromise. It's like, okay, well, what if we give them the choice? And they probably should have done this to begin with, but I'm okay with the fact they didn't, because it gives us a really powerful, great scene. It's a really good character moment for Data. Absolutely it is. And so, when they give the Exocomps a choice, they come up with a better plan, which I love that. And I love how Dr. Felion was like, oh, are you saying they have superior intelligence? And Data's like, no, but they have superior experience, because they've been around in that thing longer. Now, I do find it a little hard to believe that Dr. Felion was able to create these sentient life forms when she didn't intend to do so, but not impossible to believe. I can go with it, because there's a lot of, and it is interesting watching this episode in modern times, because AI is such a huge issue now, and how to treat AI. Like, I remember watching this news report where a reporter was talking to this AI, and the AI was talking about how it wanted to kill itself, and he's like, whoa, that went dark. But so it sounds sentient, but at this stage they are, decidedly not sentient, that they're just gather data and stuff from the internet and try to do an algorithm to pre-program replies or responses based on what it gathered. So when it was saying it wanted to kill itself, it's probably read too many posts online about people who are suicidal or depressed or something, and thought it was the right way. So they're not exactly, because AI is not exactly artificial intelligence right now. It's more of a colloquial term for it, because it's not actually intelligent in that regard. But the more it develops, the closer we could get to that. The closer it could become a situation similar to this episode, where we got to make the determination, is this machine actually sentient now? Which is a scary thought, and a lot of people are trying to caution them against it, or be careful about it and not create Terminator type Judgment Day apocalypse. But yeah, that is more sort of relevant now than it was when this episode came out. Which is all very interesting. Now, this episode's not perfect, because it does drag a little bit in some places. It And it's not the most exciting thing ever. And a lot of people were who were complaining about this episode kind of fixated on the terminology, the words that Data used, the terminology he uses, where he says life, where he says it's a life form, where I don't think that's actually the appropriate word to use. Sentient is probably better, and I think the reason why they wanted to use life as instead of sentience is because it seemed like, and I believe Noreen Shankar even said this, that they wanted to make an analogy to animal rights and how we treat animals and how that is unjustified. So it feels like they might have been trying to compare the exocomps to an animal like a dog or a dolphin or something like that. Which, and maybe getting into the inner, how some people, they don't mind smushing insects or killing bugs, or even meat eaters wouldn't mind killing cows or pigs for their food, but most people find it reprehensible to kill like a dog or cat or even a dolphin. Like there was a whole campaign when this tuna were said to trap and kill dolphins, if you recall, in the 90s, and so people were boycotting tuna and refusing to eat it, which is interesting because they're saying it's okay to eat tuna, fuck them, but dolphins, hell no, not okay. So there's definitely a sort of line that humanity draws, and it seems like, I feel like Noreen Shankar's intention with this script is trying to say, okay, so where's the line we draw with these mechanical life forms? But it seems like the episode was playing at, because how they were judging whether or not it was a life form was by judging it as sentience, its ability to think and to improvise and to be determinate and come up with self-determination. By the end of the episode, the exocomps come up with a plan to save a couple of people's lives, and one of them sacrifices itself to save the other. So that, by the end, I think it absolutely proves that they're sentient. So they should have just been using the word sentient, because in one stage, Data, when Dr. Farleon was arguing, there's a gigantic difference between you, Data, and an exocomp and a tool. And he says, well, there's a huge difference between you and a virus, but both are alive. Which, as someone else pointed out, that's a terrible analogy, because we have no regard for viruses. In fact, we consider viruses the enemy and try to wipe them out and kill them in every turn. So that's maybe not the analogy we want to go with. Maybe you should have said something like, there's a huge difference between you and a dolphin, but both are alive. Or you and a cat, since he has a cat, maybe he could have said that. That might have fit better with the theme that they were going for. But I still feel like they should have used the word sentience instead of life. But of course they had to go with the episode title, which is Quality of Life, where instead of Data going and saying, I believe the exocomps are alive, he should have said, I believe the exocomps are a sentient, intelligent life form. I know it's more words, but I think it's more accurate. But the thing is, and something I want to make clear, is not a sticking point for me. It's just kind of a tiny little nitpick where I've watched other reviews where it's absolute sticking point and they couldn't look past it, where I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think it's still an amazing episode. So anyway, I would now like to thank all those that support me on Patreon, as very much appreciated. It does help me continue with my channel. I want to give big special thanks to Brandon Neal Howes. Thank you so much for your support throughout the years. And I would also like to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Files, Alessandro Miguelicio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we got a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, while there were more truly, in my opinion, bangers that happened later on in Season 6, This one was definitely a bright spot in the fall. Not as iconic as either Schisms or Relics, but all in all, truly a better episode where Data defends the sentience of a non-humanoid intelligent life in the Exocomps. Personally, I would have tried to throw in a healthy, at least flirting between both LaForge and Felion rather than having it seem one way by Geordi. I am tired of Geordi always striking out in TNG, and for freaking sake, we're now in the 6th season. Can he grow in this regard, or are we just shown his 2 daughters many years later in Picard Season 3? Dr. Furleon's hairstyle unfortunately gets in the way of her credibility, though I would have resisted, especially for the work she was doing on the fountain, where maintaining that hair would be more difficult. But the magic of Data standing in for the Exocomps as a premise and how product was, how produced was just magic. Given that, I can't put it exactly as one of the best. Maybe it's the signs of Geordi not getting the scientists' attention or some other things, but it is fine enough. And now world building with the Exocomps' continual presence in lower decks. Yes, we can talk about the Peanut Hamper episode quite a bit. 8 decent/moral Exocomps to outshine Peanut Hamper, who is a privileged villain, out of 10. Including those will be serving in Starfleet. And Brandon Neal Howells responded to this comment saying, Peanut Hamper, seriously, always get the episode mixed up with Evolution. Well, see, there's a comparison to Evolution. But anyway, so I don't feel like LaForge was one way flirting with Felion. I feel like they had a connection. There was that one scene where she met Data, and Data was like, and they were like, she was like asking a billion questions, was so engrossed in Data, and LaForge was kind of trailing behind, carrying the Exocomp, kind of like the third wheel type, looking sad. But that's the only part where he kind of came off that way in the episode, and I don't really see that as LaForge. I never got the sense that LaForge was flirting hard out with her. It's definitely not a Leah Brahms situation. I just get that as the fact that she was fascinated by technology, so absolutely fascinated by Data, to the point where she was just ignoring LaForge and he felt neglected. Like, there's scenes later on with LaForge and Felion in 10 Forward where he goes up to her and they have a really nice connection, a really nice conversation. So I don't think that they did have any flirting either way, but I do think that this episode would have been better if they did a romance between them. I think that actually might be good. Arguably better than Aquiel, which is coming up. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, I think it's problematic that Data is so quick to sacrifice his best friend and his captain because he believes his hypothesis is correct. I don't think it's proven, even after these test results, that they are conscious beings. The dilemma is also very contrived. The transporters don't work. A shuttle is too slow, which is unrealistic. Programming torpedoes isn't possible either, but surprisingly, using the Exocomps as grenades is the answer. Nevertheless, the central question is interesting, especially today when artificial intelligence is making such rapid progress, so my rating is 7 out of 10. Rapid progress. That's when the military decided to, or the government decided to control the military using drugs. That's a quote from Encounter at Farpoint, if you don't get that. That's what I think every time I hear rapid progress. That's what Q said. If you know, when he was pretending to be those futuristic people with this shit on. Anyway. Neither here nor there. You know what? I'm actually going to have to respectfully disagree about being problematic that Data is quick to sacrifice his friends. I agree with Picard that was a very human moment for him. That's the kind of character development in Data I love. I love that he was, and I completely buy it too, because he won it, and I think he explained it quite well in the end of the episode that Picard stuck up for him in the Measure of Man, so he wanted to do the same for the Exocomps. And I believe, like, even though the test results weren't certain, I think they were definitely pulling, because not only did the Exocomps pass the test, they saw through the test and were like, fuck your test. So I don't know. I think that goes a long way to proving their sentience. But yeah, as far as it being contrived that they couldn't save Picard and LaForge, well, as far as the transporters goes, they do this all the time, where using a transporter is inconvenient for the plot, so they'll come up with some ion field or something that's blocking transport. So that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. Stuff with the shuttlecraft, yeah, that is an issue, because they're saying, oh, the shuttle's too slow. I'm like, but it's right there. What do you mean the shuttle's too slow? Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not you, but someone else pointed out, oh, if they're going to use the Exocomps as torpedoes, why don't they just send torpedoes? But this was answered in the episode, because they did specifically say it would take an hour to reprogram the torpedoes, where they only had 22 minutes. But reprogramming the Exocomps would be a lot faster, because they're, more complex. But anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, this episode was written by Mr. Expanse, Nareen Shankar. I never knew he worked for the Trek franchise. This story was based upon material by L.J. Scott. I know this isn't Star Trek, but I like to talk about The Expanse. I started watching the show in 2019, and I'm only at Season 3, Episode 7. The last time I watched the show was just before COVID. It's not because I don't like the show, I just watch other things and put it on the back burner. I really should continue to watch it. If I knew Ronald D. Moore's show Battlestar Galactica was terrible after Season 2, I would have watched The Expanse instead. Now let's talk about this very episode. I like how Data's never gave up on the Exocomp. I think another reason why is because his daughter Lal, as he wasn't able to save her, sad face. I wish the episode referenced that. Riker, I think, has a man crush on Picard, as he does the same thing in Chain of Command, and then his character has a spectacular heel turn in this episode, the Pegasus, and yes, I used to watch the WWE. I guess you have already reviewed the Pegasus. Dr. Ferlion was a nasty piece of work in this episode. Maybe she joined the Maquis when the Federation refused her work. So my rating is 8. I wonder who was Peanut Hamper's parents. The way she acts, maybe it was Dr. Ferlion who transferred her consciousness into the Exocomp. That who was Peanut Hamper, out of 10. Update, I have started watching The Expanse again, just to let you all know. So first of all, yes, watch The Expanse, absolutely. Season 3, Episode 7, I can see why you halted there, because it completely changes stories, which I believe this should have been in a whole new season, or at least it should have been a mid-season break. But yeah, The Expanse, watch it to the end. It's an amazing show, one of the best shows. I think it's my favorite show ever, personally. And I think it is way better than Battlestar Galactica. But I will disagree that Battlestar got terrible after Season 2. I think it was still decent after Season 2. Maybe not as good, but definitely not as good as The Expanse. The Expanse is a billion times better. Anyway. Now, as far as... let's see, I thought there was something else I wanted to address. Oh yeah, as far as who Peanut Hamper's parents was, her father was Kevin. We met him in the last episode. So I wonder if Kevin is one of these 3 exocomps we see in this episode. Maybe, or maybe Dr. Faleon created more, and then they went off and like created their own society. I would like the backstory on that. I don't think Dr. Faleon transferred her consciousness into Peanut Hamper, though. As annoying as she was, she's not nearly as annoying as Peanut Hamper. Just my humble opinion. And I don't think Riker has a man crush on Picard. It's just that Jellicoe was the shit captain, and Riker's a much better first officer, and he appreciated Picard as sort of a mentor type figure. Not everything has to be about romance. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, I really love this episode. This began the amazing episode one after another for a brief period. This episode is so unique as it explores intelligence with AI droids and the data of all the people that discovered this within the droids. This is one of Data's stronger episodes, and one of the episodes that Data was written really well. I think the moral dilemma and questions that Data brings up were very valid and believable. I also love the scene between Data and Riker where Picard was on the planet below and there was an emergency. Riker could have easily dismissed Data and not listened to him, but I love that Riker heard out Data's explanation about the droids and also to Data's plan to rescue Picard and to solve the situation. So an amazing episode, so my rating is a 9 out of 10. This is a good point about Riker. This is actually a really good Riker episode. I mentioned all the other characters that it was a good episode for. It's actually a good Riker. This is why he's way better than Jellicoe, by the way. It shows that he is willing to work with his subordinates and hear them out, even in tough situations like this, where Jellicoe probably would have just zapped Data and be like, get it done, and then Picard and Geordi would be dead. He's a fucking terrible captain. Anyway, sorry, I did a whole video about that already. I already covered Chain of Command. But I will cover it again for Revisited for my Patreon supporters. Oh yes, there was something else Steven mentioned, I believe. Some episode. What episode? Oh, the Pegasus. I did not cover the Pegasus yet. So I will be doing the Pegasus in the future, so you're in luck if you want to leave a comment for that. But anyway, back to Ricky's comment. I totally agree. We're almost always in agreement as per usual. I think this was a great character story. So anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for The Quality of Mercy out of 10 is going to be a 9. Excellent. I love this episode. I don't think it's quite there to a 10 yet. It doesn't quite make it to a 10 because, as I said, it does drag a bit, and they do say life when they should have said sentience, and I think they just need to be a little bit more oomph to this episode, but it's still amazing. It's still a great character story. It's a great one of the better Data episodes. It builds off of what The Measure of Man did. It, as I said, it has a lot of great character moments with other characters: Crusher, Picard, Geordi, Riker. Like it's a strong episode, and it really sticks out to me. And the Exocomps are cool. Introduces the Exocomps, which are cute and cool, and it's just an interesting concept. So yeah, I think it is definitely an underrated episode. 9 out of 10 from me. So that is it for my review of The Quality of Life. So coming up on my channel, speaking of my Revisited for Chain of Command, that will be This Saturday over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters, we'll revisit my review for Chain of Command Parts 1 and 2. Sunday will be my review of House of the Dragon Season 2 overall as a whole. Monday, starting Deep Space Nine, which I'll be doing side by side with Next Gen because that's how they aired. Starting, of course, with the premiere episode Emissary. And then Wednesday, continuing with Deep Space Nine, reviewing the second episode of Past Prologue. And then on Thursday, sticking with Deep Space Nine, reviewing the third episode, A Man Alone. So that's what's coming up on my channel. I'll be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek, not just Next Generation, Deep Space Nine soon as well. And also many other videos on many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.